I want to get a little bit of a broader understanding, specifically of what's happening in India's space tech landscape. From you, right? Like you're an insider, you're part of one of the large companies that has really sort of like taken the space and people's imagination, right? So maybe three things that I broadly want to understand. So one, from a demand perspective, right? Like what is happening or what do you see practically happening, right? Whether it's with y'all and others like you who are building satellites, or the folks who are on the sort of like space launch side, or all of these other startups which are trying to service different parts of the supply or value chain of space tech. Why is there so much demand? Why does there seem to be so much adoption at this point of time, right? Because we've been seeing satellites go up and get launched ever since we were kids, which is like almost 30 years at this point of time. But in the last 5, 6, 7 years, especially, there's something seems to be different from a demand perspective, right? So first, give us a little bit of a picture of what's happening on the demand side, and then second, what I'd also love to understand is equally with the activity on the demand side, the number of startups that are coming up, the amount of investment that is happening, sort of regulatory support that we're seeing from the government and other players to encourage startups and others to like build in this space has also gone up, right? So what's also driving so much of the supply side activity, from an innovation standpoint, has something been unlocked in the last 5, 7, 10 years, which has really made a difference, right? So just a broad idea of, the why now behind space tech, what's got everybody so excited in the ecosystem. I'd love to understand that, and then, with that, jump into what's happening specifically at Pixel.
Yeah, I don't think it's why now. I think it was kind of why 2017, 2018, 2019, which is really when a lot of the kernel for the things that are happening today were sown, or the seeds were sown then. And I think the reason for that was people started seeing what was happening in the US and internationally. SpaceX had really made a mark for itself, and there were other companies like Blue Origin and Rocket Lab and Planet Labs and a few others that had really started to take off as well. So some folks in India looked at it and they were like, if this can be done in the US and Europe, why not in India? We have a very grand heritage of what ISRO has done. We can definitely build on top of that and make it even more vibrant and compete with China, which was rapidly catching up. We could compete with, US. It would take some time, but we could sort of get there with the talent that we have. So I think a lot of the companies that you will sort of hear about today started between 2017 to 2019, mostly. And the reason for that was, I think, predominantly being able to see these success stories. Also, I think a little bit of credit is to go to Team Indus. There was this team called Team Indus that really fascinated a lot of students following space at that point in time. And this was a team that was trying to participate in the Google Lunar X Prize, where the challenge basically was that you had to launch a lunar rover and a lander, and then get the rover to sort of move a few meters or so on the moon. And they were one of the very leading companies until a very long time before, sadly, they couldn't raise enough money to be able to launch it, etc. So I think it didn't really eventually work out, but I think they ended up having a lot of young, passionate folks that they had got on board from ISRO, that they had grown themselves, that ended up becoming this initial seed for of talent for a lot of other companies that sort of came later. Quite a few of our early hires were also from Team India. So I think a combination of all of that led to this sort of happening. What then happened, I think, in 2020 or 2021 is, post-COVID, there were a slew of economic measures that were announced to reinvigorate the economy in a sense. And one of them was that space technology or the space domain would also be now privatized. Until then, it was only the Indian Space Research Organization as a government entity that was allowed to do business in space. So, yes, we were building satellites, but we also didn't have a very clear pathway to what are the approvals or the permissions we need to launch it. But when it comes all the way from the Prime Minister's office and the Finance Minister that, okay, now we are going to open up space and there'll be a policy that will come out, but this is a priority for the nation, that private sector participation in space technology needs to happen. That really, I think, was the shift in the Overton window where ISRO folks and everything else started, helping us out, and some amount of regulatory risk went away. That, oh no, will India even approve it? and some amount of initial capital started opening up a little bit. Right. So
Understood.
I think that was really one of the catalysts for what we are seeing today as well, apart from being able to globally see what was happening and success stories there. And now I think there are a few mini success stories in India also. Young folks and other folks in ISRO and other organizations have seen Skyroot, for example, do their demo suborbital launch, and Agnikul do their suborbital demo launch. Have seen Pixel launch its demo satellites, and last year we launched 6 commercial satellites. So I think
Right.
people see all of that, it kind of, I think, shatters some of those misconceptions that can we even build it? I mean, because you can, we built it, so there's no reason why anyone else can't if you are
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
your skills and knowledge and put a team together. So I think that's kind of what's happening and why we are here and why we are seeing all of this resurgence. And thankfully, last year also there was this big deep tech innovation fund that was announced by the government for 20,000,
Right, right, right.
which means that more capital is now opening up.
And double clicking specifically just a little bit on, the regulatory support, the support that you're seeing from the government. I think very clear from what you said on sort of why this shift has come about. Would you talk a little bit more about how it's manifested practically, in terms of support for folks such as yourself, building in space tech? Like one, of course, the approval to be able to do these things to is quite important, and like the crux, as you said, of even being able to do this viably from a commercial perspective. But apart from that, on the day to day, as you've been building, launching, doing any of these different things, right from the beginning till today, how has this attitude or this POV from the government, how has it helped you all practically in terms
Yeah,
of?
I think one of the very tangible direct ways is, when we built our satellites, we took them into ISRO facilities to use their testing infrastructure to test how they were performing and then be able to actually then launch it, right? We also ended up launching one of our satellites with ISRO's rocket as well, right? And there's a lot of retired ISRO scientists who are reviewers and consultants for what we do, and they become a good sounding board for some of our ideas if they are too crazy or not crazy enough, etc. So I think that's the tangible ways in which ISRO has helped. The government has been particularly receptive to our feedback as well. Like when initially we wanted to launch from India, we had to pay an 18% GST on launch, whereas that didn't exist when you paid for a foreign company, right? And that would end up making the Indian launches 18 to 25% more expensive generally. And we gave this feedback, and then the GST on launch within India was removed, and that kind of made it a little bit of parity to make sure that we didn't end up spending more just to launch from India. The FDI policy, the foreign direct investment, the feedback was there isn't a deep pool of capital in India yet that could risk take for such risky ventures when you're launching something to space. And so we do need to bring international money and capital into India for these kinds of companies who are a little bit more risk taking because they've made money elsewhere in the US or somewhere. That also sort of was fairly liberal when it came out last year. The space policy is very forward looking in terms of providing equal footing for the startups alongside ISRO in terms of the infrastructure and facilities, etc. So I think that's been the government response. Beyond that, it's all the intangible stuff like, when the government is supporting the sector and there are buyers and there are supporters and promoters, the capital also opens up slightly more. And so, companies have been able to raise their Series A's and B's with much relative ease compared to what it would be if, we were fighting against an establishment. So
Sure,
that.
sure.